evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started, and we're going to start off with the our Pledge of Allegiance, and then we'll get started. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Just want to welcome everyone today. It's an exciting time for a couple folks, and I'm going to ask Mr. Ben Avadia and Mrs. Corinne Elmore Stratton to come up and come up to the podium, and Mr. Green is going to swear you in as official board members.
Support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey, and that I will faith and allegiance and to the governments established in the United States and this state under the authority of the people, so help me God. Solemnly swear that I possess the qualifications prescribed by law for the office of member of a board of education. I am not disqualified as a voter. Pursuant to RS 19 colon 4-1. Am not disqualified due to conviction of a crime or offense listed in NJSA 18A colon 12-1, and that I will faithfully, impartially, and justly perform all the duties of that office. According
Help me God. Thank you.
There are two seats with your names on it. I don't know which one is which, but okay. Congratulations to our new board members. And now the first official act we have is a roll call. Mrs. Sugars.
Mrs. Matlack,
Here.
Mrs. Neary,
Here.
Mr. Avadia, Mrs. Seidel, Mrs. Scarpolino,
Here.
Mrs. Schultz,
Here.
Mrs. Stratton,
Here.
Mrs. Tong, Mr. Goodwin.
Here. Thank you. So at this point in time, we have our first comment section, and you can comment on any items on the action or any items on the agenda. I just ask that you state your name, address, and what item on the agenda that you'd like to speak to. We actually have two comment sections. Later in the meeting, we'll have a section where you can speak on any item, but this is for specific action items or items on the agenda.
Mindy Rosen, 6 Fairhaven Court. My question is, how do you justify paying even $1 for remulching playgrounds that are not all accessible to the disabled and are not all compliant with the law? in your move, in your move, oh, I'm sorry. In your moving forward that you presented a long time ago, you said that you were, your ideal, what you were going to do for playgrounds was to ensure there's an accessible route.
Excuse me, could you tell me what item you're addressing
Oh,
on
the
the
mulch.
agenda?
The mulch.
What item is that, please?
Oh, I don't know. It's in the agenda, the mulch, and how much money you're spending for mulch for the playgrounds. I think it's on page 24.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, so in your moving forward, you said you wanted to ensure accessible routes to playgrounds. And my other question is, what good does putting mulch in when the 2x4s are blocking a lot of kids from entering and making them not accessible? So that's the question on that. My other question is, when will we have a dollar amount for the new road construction, and where's that money coming from?
I'm
That's
sorry, what
also-
was the question? A dollar amount for what?
The new road construction, the construction company that you are hiring to oversee East, also in the agenda.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Rick Short.
It's on.
It's on?
Yep.
Okay. Rick Short, 1002 Charlton Parkway. I do have the same question under the amount that we are paying for a general contractor to oversee the projects. There has to be some certain percentage within the industry that's used for a GC on a job. It almost seems like you're giving this GC a blank check. There has to be some kind of specified number that is the max amount that we should pay. I mean, if we're doing a $220 million bond, sure, it's going to be high. If this is just a $3 million project, we need some kind of limit on what we're going to spend for a construction management company. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yoni Yaris, 422 Cherry Hill Boulevard. This is going to be in Part D of the Committee of the Whole Board work session, specifically the parent attendance at school bus stop. How's that? Better, Ann? Hi. I just wanted to talk about the parent attendant to school bus that you guys are going to be discussing during the work session. My wife and I raised these concerns to Dr. Smith, who was incredibly beyond responsive in terms of our concerns about it as a parent of a rising kindergartner starting in about 3 weeks, and having a second grader who's also going
I'm
to be...
sorry.
We can start from the top.
Could you tell me what?
Sure. I can start from the top.
It was. I could. Yeah.
I can start from the top.
I couldn't hear it. I'm sorry.
No worries. Yoni Yaris, 422 Cherry Hill Boulevard. I'm talking about Section D, policy and legislation, specifically the policy review for the parent attendant to school bus stop affecting kindergarten parents across the district. My wife and I raised our concerns because obviously you guys set the policies, the administration is responsible for the regulations, so we reached out to Dr. Smith and Transportation to get a sense of where you guys were heading, because we have a rising second grader on the bus as well who we are allowed to let walk home from the bus, and we'd be comfortable letting our kindergartner walk home with her as well from the bus. And just really talking about the fact that you have a policy for walkers that would enable a parent to designate an older student to walk them home, but that doesn't seem to appear to be the case for the school bus policy for bus stops. So to be able to get those two policies and link with each other, because it's the same path as someone going home, and in fact going from the bus stop to the house is a shorter distance and less at risk for potential things happening for a parent. So just an appreciation for that review. I know it's a very different policy at this point because I feel like it was written when we had half day, and especially for a half day kindergarten starting a PM kindergarten, I want a parent at the bus stop because that's the middle of the day. A kindergartner should not be sitting out at that point. But in the morning and at the afternoon, you're talking about a bus stop full of kids. It's a very different experience now, and just to really think about that, because I know for my family and I, it affects us that we will have a young child at home, and being at the bus stop with that makes it very challenging, plus having to get a child from Berkeley. So we would sincerely appreciate this being adjusted. Otherwise, it would cause a lot of stress on my family, and I'm sure others who also have older children who they entrust to walk their child home. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments at this point? Okay. If not, then we're going to go ahead and move into our committee of a whole. And we're going to start off with curriculum and instruction. And Dr. Smith is going to present some items under the curriculum and instruction.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. I brought this binder up just to show how long I could potentially talk. I'm not going to, but just so you know. So when I go shorter, how it could have been. All right. So there are a number of items. We're going to start with a PowerPoint first, which is about our school performance reports. And so as soon as that's queued up, we can get going. In the meantime, I'll tell you a little bit about school performance reports. If you haven't seen them, they're on each of our school websites. The NJDOE, New Jersey Department of Ed, releases them yearly each spring, and it shows a portrait of the school's performance in different ways from the preceding year. So, in other words, the most recent school performance report that's available is from 2017-18. So there is a bit of a lag, but it is the most detailed portrait of a school's performance that the New Jersey Department of Ed does release. And so we mine that for information about how we can improve. And there we go. So thank you, Mrs. Wilson. Fast fingers. Thank you. So if we dive into slide 2, we will see that it includes this is an evolving document. So the state, if you went back, say 5 years, you would see that the school performance report was actually about half the size it is now. Among other pieces they've added in that time in the last 5 years has been longitudinal data. So you can look at performance trends over the past 3 years, for example. Then on to slide 3. We go one more. There we go. So it breaks it up into different sections. If we go back one slide, sorry. Thank you. So it breaks it up into different easily navigable sections, which are consistent between elementary, middle, and high school, except for student growth, which refers to the MSGP, the median student growth percentile, which applies to elementary, middle only, and then the college and career readiness applies just to middle and high school, and then finally graduate and post-secondary data is, as you would imagine, just a high school only. Next slide. The first thing we'll take a look at, if you click that link to Stockton's summary report, this is just a sample. So the state releases 2 different kinds: the detailed report, which is the 30-plus page version, and then they release a 1-page kind of cover sheet. And so you can look down, again, like these are on our website, and you can see different sort of hallmark data points, and it breaks it down by things like attendance, state assessment data performance, the student growth percentile performance. Okay, if we can go back to the slide there. And then if we look at, you can click either one of the high school ones just to see the difference. This is shows you that graduation and post-secondary data. And as it's loading, one thing when you look for it, you'll see that it doesn't just give the school data, but it gives the statewide averages, so you have a context. And we can, while that's loading, we can go back to the, and just keep going to the next slide. When it pops up, we'll jump back to it. So one of the sort of most aggregate data points in the school performance report is the summative rating. So those are on different pages respectively as listed there. But every school performance report does have a summative rating. So if we go one more page further, we'll see what those are based on. So the high school rating based on those bullet points. Saying Park just because, again, this is 17-18 data. So at that point it was Park. Now it's the NJSLA. So when this coming spring, when the school performance reports come out for the 18-19 year, we'll see NJSLA. And then graduation rate, chronic absenteeism, and then down in the middle and elementary. And then as we're moving on into the, this shows you the percentile rank, and then that's statewide, and then the score, okay? For the different schools, we've got our high school and our elementary, high school and middle. And then we've got our elementary. Okay. So yeah, good question, right? So let's we'll go on to the next part. So we look at from when these are we eagerly anticipate the release of these, and then we disseminate them. First, we pull them off the state website, disseminate them to the principals, so they can review with their, in the case of middle and high school, with their administrative teams, and in the case of elementary school, they review them in their cluster groups, and which are so we have our elementary principals organized into clusters so that they can have like colleague discussions the same way that middle and high school can have with their administrative teams. And then when we meet level meetings and DLT meetings, our district leadership team meetings, we provide time for the principals to further discuss the data. Furthermore, Dr. Mahan and her supervisors follow up with the principals about specific data points and areas for improvement within those school performance reports. We shared this exact presentation we shared with them when we first created it in the spring, so that they could begin to see sort of their own comparison with, school to school, and to have that context across the district. And if we go one more slide there. So what that leads to is conversations about what stands out, positives, but also opportunities for improvement. And there are both. And then they can begin to think about what that will look like in their own school building. So we go on to the next slide. So one other piece, just since that question, what are we doing with the data, it's purposely phrased in the present tense, because that question is never in the past. So for example, like next week, we have some administrative retreat days as we look ahead towards the coming school year, and we will again be coming back to this school performance report data as our principals sit down to look at what building goals they want to develop for the year. So the conversations continue. Some highlights, if we can go back to the elementary just for a second. So there's a lot, to look through 12 school performance reports for elementary and identify trends. These are sort of trying to put it in the most macro portrait here, but if you look at ELA and math, so every school is showing progress or excelling. ELA student growth, we want to address that in particular at 2 schools, Cooper and Mann, and math in particular at 3 schools, Barton, Cooper, Woodcrest. And then chronic absenteeism, we're looking specifically at Kilmer and Payne. And that's the kind of disaggregation that you can get by looking across all the schools. So you can see who's succeeding, who needs to improve, and the principals can share ideas. So for example, an elementary school that is having success with chronic in reducing chronic absenteeism, that principal in the level meetings can talk about what they're doing and share ideas, and principals can know who to reach out as a go-to person for that topic. We go on the middle. Again, every school showing progress in ELA in math except Carusi math. Every school showing progress in ELA and math based on the student growth percentiles. And then chronic absenteeism, we want to look more deeply at that for improvement at Beck and Carusi. High school, ELA and math, East excelling based on the state assessment and chronic absenteeism. East and West above the state average in graduation rate, the percent of 11th to 12th graders taking AP courses, and the percent of grads enrolling in college. One could argue that the two most important numbers for high school in these school performance reports are the graduation rate and the percent of graduates enrolling in college. So those ultimately are kind of like the data points that point farthest into the future in terms of where they're going. ELA and math achievement need to be addressed at West. East and West rates of chronic absenteeism are positively below the state average. That means they're doing better than the state average. The state average for chronic absenteeism is 14.9%, which is higher than middle and higher than elementary. It's kind of a factor of the age a bit. So that's something to keep in mind too if you were to compare elementary to middle to high school for something like absenteeism, which is it is a data area in all three levels, but the state average for each of those levels is different. So, and then closing the achievement gap. So we met our ELA annual target district-wide and in all subgroups. So there is also, I should point out here, a district SPR, a district school performance report, in addition to the school one. So the district one is the compilation of all of our students. And then subgroups that had an increased percent of level 4 and 5, which is what we want. That's meeting or exceeding expectations. It's a 5-level scale. We saw increases in economically disadvantaged, Hispanic, students with disabilities, 2 or more races, and white. And then in math, again, there's a lot of, I won't read all that, but you can see that as we look at this, we break it out by subgroup to see where we're, because there are, stories within the numbers about different subgroups as they, and we want to make sure that all of our subgroups are making, are meeting success and making progress. And so back to it, like if we get to number 3, district-wide Park Algebra 1 mean scale score increase in all subgroups from 16-17 to 17-18. That's a significant data point. Just Algebra 1 is the foundational course in the high school math sequence, and so that's a good predictor of the kind of solid foundation students will have as they move on to geometry and Algebra 2 and pre-calc. And then if we go one more, graduation rate increased overall and in all subgroups. Post-secondary enrollment rate, 16 months after graduation, increased in all subgroups except Black or African American, Hispanic, and 2 or more races. That's an important one. It's kind of like sticking the landing, after you leave high school and you go to college. And then chronically absent, again, decreased, which is a good thing, except in the subgroups listed there. And questions?
So on the page with the scores listed, I noticed the scores amongst the elementary schools did not seem to vary as much, but as soon as you hit the middle schools and the high schools, the score differential was rather dramatic.
Mm-hmm.
Have we begun to look into that and the drivers behind those differences? Because
Yeah.
you would think it would carry through, but it's not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can go back to that. It's earlier in the PowerPoint here. go back to the high school. There we go. So, yeah. So one thing just to give you an example of one step. So this past year in 18-19. So this data represents our high school students taking those state assessments at their earliest opportunity possible in the state testing window. So the state testing window typically opens in March and it extends through the end of May. And we have to do a lot of testing, right, through all of our levels. This year we moved high school to the end of the testing window. So we anticipate that will lift all the scores across the board as you look at what curriculum they may not have covered before the test occurred. The difference there is stark, as you say, it'll be helpful to see what difference that variable makes of the students testing so much later in the window. It's about 6 weeks later.
And Dr. Smith, just a reminder for folks, this is not new information. This is all information that was presented a year ago, right? And there was a request, this came out of a discussion at the C&I committee. Because this is a committee of the whole meeting, we don't have committee meetings this month because of our current structure. So this came out of a request and discussion that goes back to May with the C&I meeting to have another discussion and take a look at what the performance reports were. So I don't want people to get too wound up right now in terms of the specifics that are in here. It's more the discussion about what's been done and some of the work that has taken place during 2018, 2019, because you'll see a similar or a parallel report later on this fall after the data points are all released to us.
And that's a good point, Dr. Milash. So the data from the standardized test data from 18-19, we get that before the actual school performance reports come out. So that's released in time for us to give a separate presentation. Typically, I want to say, I recall that was one of my first board meetings that I was at last fall. Maybe it was September-ish, October. And so we will have that data to be able to look at. We don't need to wait till the spring to be able to see that.
One of the questions I had is one of the last points that you made around the after 16 months, it looked like African Americans and Hispanics. Was it across the board, male, female, or is it divided in any way?
Yeah. So it doesn't. The school performance report itself doesn't break it out by ethnicity and gender together, just by ethnicity. So we don't know within that data at this point if there are other nuances within that to show, kind of explain why the decrease. It's definitely our high schools do make a really strong message about our students developing a vision for their future and a plan to achieve that. I think the goal is that our students, when they leave our district, that they're prepared to succeed, whatever their next step. So I know that they take that very seriously in terms of the work that they do, and that they will be working with their staff to try to make sure that our students have the tools they need when they leave. It's hard to know with numbers all of the possibilities within that number. Why it would really require almost like trying to circle back with those students potentially to follow up and find out whether they changed their mind about the path they wanted to go down, or what the reason was. It may not have been that due to the academic struggles, let's say.
I think I know the answer to this because I know we do a lot of outreach to other school districts. But like when I think of schools, say like some of the schools, like even in Philadelphia, where they have really success rates in terms of African Americans going on to college and all that. Have we done any like cross studies or reaching out to them to get any input in terms of what things that have helped them be successful?
Mm-hmm. Well,
I'm thinking specifically like Masterman or some school like that that are really seem like they're successful in that
Mhm.
area.
Mhm. I can't speak to outreach like over the river to like those what we call like almost like magnet school type situations that you're going to find in like a larger city district that has those resources. Definitely, and this will come up in later shares through the CNI presentation. But when you look at things like our memorandums of agreement with RCBC and with Stockton, which provide students with dual credit, for example, like that's a key factor. That our students have the opportunity to start college with already credits in the bank that they've earned through high school courses that they've taken. That can certainly help to that they already have a springboard, or our AP classes also. So when you look at the especially that summary page, which are it was buffering when we looked at it, tried to look at it earlier, but if you look at the East and West summary pages, you can see that both East and West have a higher percentage of students taking AP classes and AP tests. So, that and what's really not. I don't want to, describe too much importance to just a single test because AP is just a test, right? But what is nice about it as a feature that the NJ SLA does not have is it's national. So in fact, global, because students who study abroad take it as well. So it gives you a sense of where we stand relative to other districts, say in Pennsylvania or other places. We did earn the AP District Honor Roll Award from the College Board for increases in subgroups of ethnicity for the last, I think it was 5 years. So that's kind of that's a really hard. I know, like, I know in my short time here, like when we won that, I was like, that is, you have to maintain those increases for 5 years straight. So if you miss 1 year, you're out of the running, So, so something like that, I think, is, it's that trying to figure out. So we have those strong areas, right? For example, and can we get that to translate more in seeing that percentage of students staying in post-secondary 16 months after graduation? Can we get that to translate in getting that percentage up? That's where it gets a little. It's almost like the farther they are after graduation from us, like so 16 months out, it's harder to know all the different variables that could be at play in that. But yeah.
Hi. You mentioned that there's a district SPR, and I'm just wondering, it seems like there's a big differential between, I guess, frankly, East and West, but there are also more concentration of students on East. From a district SPR level, what's our percentile? Is it broken down by, like, school level, or do we get one score that kind of represents everything?
So we could actually, well, it might take a little bit to pull it up, but if you pull it up, you can see that those different disaggregate categories, so like graduation post-secondary rates or elementary and middle median student growth percentiles, you can see those within the, so it encompasses sort of all the differentiation of the different levels. But when you look at high school performance, so like let's say you were looking at our performance on Algebra 2, you'd be looking at a combined percentage of East and West in the district, all the students that took it in our district. So, and to your point, like East being a larger school by about 900 students, it'll have exactly that effect on the district percentages. Mm-hmm. So, good. Yeah.
So now that we've seen this, and it doesn't have the 2018, 2019, but as a trend, the trend is hold statistically. So I'd imagine come 2018, 2019, the numbers are not going to look dramatically different. So when we look at this again in the fall, is that when we'll begin to look at drivers and try to understand to make actionable plans?
So the building goals for 1819, and if you look at our board goals, you know, where there are a couple pieces in there that will be that we're looking forward to for this year. So, for example, that the building goals are shared at the December CNI meeting, and then the progress towards those goals will be shared at the June CNI meeting. So I think the conversation we're having now I think those will be two nice opportunities to kind of like get further installments in this conversation. So we have the data right now, and then the next step is the goals, developing the goals, and then sharing those goals, and then at the end sort of showing, all right, where are we at now relative to the goals. The best goals aren't going to be like as widely scoped as a school performance report. They're going to be more aimed at certain areas within that, but certainly this data will inform that goal development process. All right. So if there aren't any questions for now, but like I said, this is a conversation that we'll be coming back to in other installments as the year rolls along. Go on to the next CNI item, which actually, if Ms. Minjin's around, Ms. Bonnie Minjin's going to talk about the next item.
Good evening. I'm here just to present the standing orders, which are the nurses' standing orders that are reviewed by our district school physician, Dr. Eric Requay, at Virtua. And once he approves all the forms that the school nurses, the orders that they use, as well as parent permission forms, the nurses, we review it on opening day. All the nurses will receive them. So, for example, there's the acetaminophen and ibuprofen parent signature, permission form, Benadryl, suntan lotion requires a doctor's note, standing orders for Narcan is in there, self-administering, an asthma inhaler, an EpiPen, allergy medical plan. So it's this thick. So it's and this is everything that we do in the district, and it's updated every single year and approved by, like I said, by Dr. Eric Requay. And we will have it distributed on our in-service day, all the nurses, and review it, and especially go over with the new nurses that will be employed this year. Any questions?
So there's been no major changes?
No.
Over the past year
No,
to any
probably
procedure
the
or anything?
Correct. The Narcan
Okay.
is probably the newest, but
Okay.
no, everything else has been the same.
Okay, thank you.
All of our nurses will have Narcan in the offices, as well as our campus police. They've all been trained.
Thank you.
Next item is we've got our first MOU, Memorandum of Agreement, with RCBC. So this is for our AP classes. Students can earn dual credit via it's our standard memorandum that we've had in years past. So it's a nice dovetail with our conversation earlier, right? And by the way, research does show that students who participate in dual credit do have a higher percentage of remaining in college 16 months after graduation compared to those who do not participate in dual credit. So, any questions on that?
Yeah, one question. Do we have any stats in terms of who's taking advantage of these classes? I mean, or kind of, who are the people that take advantage, east, west, in general?
Mm-hmm. That's an area that we're starting to track in a more thorough way. So there is a feature in Genesis that allows us to track that we've been exploring. So I think that that will let us, what we have up to this point is we know who the students are who are participating in dual credit, but to be able to look at trends within those students, we'll be better able to do that using that Genesis feature. So it would be, I think, could be useful. You know, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it might be a way to try to understand sort of where we can build on something that's already working well in that sense, and encourage more students. Making sure that, I think especially when it comes to dual credit, is making sure that everybody has the information they need, because you can't go back. You have to be presently enrolled in the course in order to apply for the dual credit. You can't a year later say, oh, can I get dual credit for that AP class I took last year? It's too late at that point. And looking at the expense of it, okay, so we've got cost-wise, a 3 to 4 credit class is $150, okay, at the regular rate. That's a tremendous return when you compare that to what it would cost to earn those credits both at RCBC or through reciprocity with other universities that are out there. So so that's it definitely is something that parents would want to consider. Now the problem with dual credit though is that, or not problem, but a dynamic is that students can also earn college credit by taking the AP test and scoring, typically having to score a 4 or 5. So there may be students there are students who do either, but not both. That makes sense. So that there will, there's a law of diminishing returns with dual credit, where as dual credit goes up, we run the risk of fewer students taking the AP test themselves because they're already getting the credit through dual credit. So that's kind of like again, it's all as so often there's these little nuances within the numbers themselves that they're not explained in the school performance reports, but they're definitely impacting the way the numbers trend over time.
Okay, go ahead. So one other question I had is, I know when you're going from that transition from 8th grade to 9th grade, typically the teachers that you have and they'll make recommendations to the students in terms of what level classes they should take, and I guess I'm concerned how do they kind of present that, and are they encouraging students to take the highest level, and then if they can't handle it to drop, or is it don't take that level? Because the only way you're going to get to taking these kind of classes is you have to start off at taking the higher level classes at the beginning to get to that point. So
yeah,
is there a strategy or anything?
There is, and a lot of thought does go into that sequencing and trying that messaging to students. So, for example, our middle schools are working hard to increase the number of students who are in the higher level math classes, since that is a predictor of the kind of advanced sequencing that you're going to get later in high school, and also looking at ways to support students who haven't taken an AP class, to help them have that first AP experience. So, like for example, AP psychology, which a student can take through so many different doorways. It's not based on a math sequence. It's not based on a science sequence. It's science, but you don't have to be a numbers whiz to succeed in it. So it's got a wide doorway for students to enter into, and often can be a great way for students to have a first taste of AP. So that's, with thinking like that in mind, and our counselors do use that sort of framing when they speak with students about their scheduling. Like one other thing they look at is so our students take the PSAT in 10th and 11th grade, and one of the features of the PSAT is something called AP potential. So every student who takes PSAT can find out if they score high enough in certain question clusters that are embedded in the test, then they can show that they have potential for certain AP tests, certain AP courses. And what that means is that there's a 70% chance or higher that if they take that AP class, they're going to score a 3 or higher on the AP test for that course. Now they still have to do all the work and everything, so it's not a guarantee, but it's that kind of like encouraging data that our counselors do share with students to try to help them consider taking what we would call like a calculated academic risk to stretch themselves. And that's, I think, and again, it comes back to why our AP numbers are so much higher by comparison with state averages. And I think about that even relative to my own background in high school, that we have a very strong AP program by comparison.
But the cost is, that's what Ms. Matlock and I were talking about. Isn't the cost for AP 65, roughly 80 for 65, 85, and the cost for dual credit is almost double that? So in some cases, it could just be the cost associated with the dual credit program.
It could be, yeah. So AP tests this past year were $100 regular fee, and then there's a free and reduced discount that's around $60. So it is cheaper to take the AP test. The risk is that if you could score a 3, which is a fine score, but that may not actually earn you credit. And depending on which college you're applying to, you might not even be earning credit. You might just be earning the ability to not have to take, say, English Composition 101. So you can, skip over the required course, let's say, but you're not actually getting credits. And it's an ever-evolving landscape, because at the end of the day, in the way that it's all a financial web, so colleges have to stay nimble to adjust to changes in high school trends. So because, like, for example, as dual credit's grown, colleges have taken a harder look at what courses that they, how they're accepting that credit. Because at the end of the day, like, you could have, and you do see it, where a student will enter college and they may already have a full year of, or a semester's worth of credits under their belt. So when that college is accepting that student, it's like they're accepting a student who's going to be there who's going to have 7 semesters of payment instead of 8, if that makes sense.
Touch back on what Mr. Goodwin was saying about, asking for the data on the students who are taking the dual credit. We get the numbers, from the AP, the number of students taking it. Perhaps we can put this as a follow-up item on the C&I committee agenda to get some information when it's available to administration. Not next month, I'm not asking for that, but when that information is available, or you have enough of it to provide us with that information, like Mr. Goodwin said, about the students who are taking advantage of that, by group, and also as a whole. I'd like to see the number as a whole, because overall, for a program to be successful, we want to continually increase the number of students who are participating in that program. So at some point as a follow-up, I'd like to see that.
Yeah, that I think that would be helpful. I mean, among other things, I can just, for example, like, students who participate in dual credit, are they taking more AP classes as they're participating, or less, relative to the general population of students? So is it that dynamic that we were talking about earlier, where as dual enrollment goes up, AP test participation goes down? Ultimately, when you look at participation in AP, participation in dual credit, those are the factors that impact college and career readiness. That's what impacts that sticking the landing 16 months after. So we would want as many students as possible to have some what we would call like college and career readiness experience like that under their belt, as many as possible. So those numbers can only help.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I know we've done student focus groups in the past. This is an intriguing idea to my left here. if truly, I mean, it's in our best interest that they succeed 6 months after, 32 months after, et cetera. If this is an indicator of that, and if financial concern is a real concern for this population of people, that's basically moving them to take the AP test versus this dual credit, I think that's good information, because funding it probably is not all that significant if we did as a district priority. So I don't know how we'd get to this information, but it seems like it's a small population that we could get a focus group type to get some direct feedback.
So we have never allowed a child who was interested in the dual credit that didn't have the funds to miss out on the opportunity.
There was an over-under on how long I was going to talk tonight, and I far exceeded that. So I'm just making quick eye contact with people who I know are So the next item is our memorandum of agreement with Stockton University. Okay, this is for 2 courses, Holocaust and Genocide and African American Studies. We've had this in the past. Very glad for that, because those 2 courses are not in the memorandum of agreement with RCBC. So those work that they work in tandem. That's a nice thing. And then the last piece was we have a new internship partnership that we're starting with Penn Medicine, and it's for 2 students at West, just to pilot it, and it will look very much like the current Virtua internship program that we have. So we're excited about that as well, and perhaps that can grow in time. And that also relates back to the number one thing, which is college and career readiness. So it's great to have that opportunity. So. And there's P&L later, just saying. So I'll be back. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Next, Mrs. Sugars is going to present items for BNF.
So I'm going to start with an easy one. We had discussed at our committee of the whole meeting that we had in July, revising our use of facilities policies. You all got a copy of that at that point. We highlighted some of the things that we were looking to make changes on. You have a copy in front of you again tonight. It is the same thing that you saw last month, with the exception of page 21. The fee schedule, we had discussed how we felt that when we compared ourselves to neighboring districts, that our building rental facilities usage fees were very competitive. We did not feel that our field rental fees were competitive at all. In fact, we think it was established in the 80s and hadn't been changed since. So it was literally, you could pay $290 for the entire year. So the only change that we are making at this point is $290 per season. So there would be a spring season, a summer season, and a fall season. We would put this policy on for our first reading at the next board meeting, following it up with the second reading at the following board meeting. We would not implement the policy for anyone who has already signed up for their fields for this year, but starting with the spring season, any new facilities users would be subject to the policy. Are there any questions about that? All right, so that was the easy one. Now we're going to talk about the difficult one. Unpaid meals policy. Oh. So we're passing out right now a copy of the district's current policy for unpaid meals. So I want to just start with some statistics. We ended the 2018-19 school year with $18,887 in arrears for 1,723 delinquent accounts. Now, of those 1723, 1,380 of them were under $10. So no big deal, just balances left over at the end of the year. However, 343 of those delinquent accounts were over $10, and they amounted to $14,383.37. So that's a significant problem. So I wanted to talk a little bit of the history of this policy and how it came to be. The previous method of notifying parents that there was a delinquent account was a letter that was sent home in the backpack. And so when we discovered this and the business office decided to take over notification, we were concerned that parents, probably most of them, never saw those notices because it winds up in a pile in the bottom of the backpack, and they weren't aware of it. So about 2 years ago, when the business office took over notification of delinquent accounts in the food service account, we wiped out all of those balances and started with a fresh slate. We updated the policy in 2016 because of changes in state law, NJSA 18A 33-21. And then again in 2017 because the USDA said that if you are participating in the National School Lunch Program, you need to have a policy. So when we changed the policy in 2017, because of the USDA requirement, the policy actually went from being a recommended policy to a mandated policy. And when we did that, we were given 3 options. And we looked at all 3 options that were available to us in terms of charging lunches and unpaid meals. Option 1 was not allowing for any charging at all. But what that meant was that as soon as a student came into the line and did not have money to pay for their lunch, a call was going to be made home to parents that day. We felt that given the size of our district and our number of students, particularly at some of our bigger schools, like the high schools and the middle schools, that would be very difficult to manage. The second option was to provide the student with a meal, giving them a predetermined amount that they could charge by the board, and once they exceeded that predetermined amount and received a second notice, they would not be served a meal anymore. The third option, which is what we opted for, was that there would be a predetermined limit, which would be $10 for us, that a child could charge. Notice would be sent to the parents that their account was delinquent. If the parent did not respond to that notice, we would offer them an alternate meal, which for us is the tuna fish meal. And then once the amount in arrears reached $20, then lunch would no longer be served. We have not been adhering to our own policy because we have not stopped serving lunch to the students. And that is part of the reason why we have some of the balances that we have accumulated so far. So tonight with me, we have Aaron and Ann from Aramark. I asked them to bring with them a tuna fish meal so that everyone could see what the tuna fish meal looks like. So it's not just a tuna fish sandwich, it's an actual meal. The child has an option to take milk, juice, cucumber sticks, carrot sticks, any fruit or vegetable that comes with it as well. It's on whole wheat. And it meets all of the nutritional standards that are required by the USDA. Now, we opted for tuna fish over peanut butter because we know that our little ones would probably very happily eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches until the end of time, and because of the number of peanut allergies that are in the district. And again, we want to make sure that we're serving something that is nutritious and that meets the USDA standards. So what happens now is we generate a letter every 10 days to parents whose accounts are in arrears. We have an English version of that letter, we have a Spanish version of that letter, and if it's notated in our student management system or if the principal calls us and tells us, we can have that letter translated into any language that we need to if there is a language barrier. We are happy to work with parents. We want people to apply for free and reduced lunch because it's good for us as it is good for them. We particularly do not want people who are in need not to take advantage of that program because that is what it is there for. So we want people to apply for free and reduced lunch. And this can be done at any time during the school year. It doesn't have to just happen at the beginning of the school year. Sometimes people's circumstances change during the course of the school year, and if that happens, they are welcome to apply. The other problem that we run into is that a lot of people don't realize that they have to apply every year. It's not a one and done. You have to apply for the program every single year, so parents need to be sure that they do that. We also work with parents that find themselves in that situation. A lot of times we'll forgive the balance back to the beginning of the school year if, they finally come around and fill out that application. So we're very willing to work with parents. We're also willing to work with principals. If a principal says to us they know of a family in need that doesn't meet the criteria, they've had a death in the family or a loss of a home or something like that, we'll take care of it. We'll make sure that child is being fed. What parents also don't know is that they can put limits on their child's accounts. A lot of times, parents will call and they're not aware that their child is buying Snapple and cookies every day or whatever. So they can put limits on their accounts as to what the children can purchase. So it becomes frustrating for us, as I said, when we're generating letters every 10 school days and we literally get no response from parents. My administrative assistant at one point was told that she could shove the lunch balance where the sun doesn't shine, or we're told that the balance is our fault because we are not monitoring and regulating what the student does. So that becomes frustrating for us. On the other hand, no one wants to see a child cry. No one wants a child to be upset because they can't get what they want for lunch, and I know that Anne deals with it all the time. It's very difficult when the little ones come through. But I think that we have demonstrated that we are 100% willing to work with the parents and that, we can set up payment plans, we can help them fill out the forms, we're giving them ample notice of what needs to be done. The other thing to keep in mind is that the food service account is an enterprise fund, which means it operates similar to a business. So out of that account, we pay for all of the expenses associated with serving breakfast and lunch. So the food, the salaries, the benefits, the management fees, insurance. We also purchase equipment, supplies, cafeteria tables out of this account. If this account was to go into a deficit situation, we would need to develop a corrective action plan to address it. And one would assume that part of that corrective action plan would be assuring that outstanding balances are being addressed, right? So I'm going to recommend as we start this new school year that we do adhere to our policy and that if those balances reach the second benchmark of $20, that we no longer serve lunch to the student until that can be addressed, or at least until we get contact from the parent indicating, they need help, they need to set up a payment plan, they need to fill out a free and reduced lunch application. If we don't adhere to our policy, we're going to be perpetually, I feel, chasing after this problem. I am concerned that if people feel that we are not addressing it, that other people will not pay, the balances that are due or pay for their students' lunch. So I know that will not be a popular decision, but I feel that we are at a point where that's the stance. We need to adhere to our policy, and that's the stance we should take. Questions? Jane.
So the letter that we send home every 10 days, what's in that letter besides the fact that you're in arrears? Does it, encourage parents to either reach out or fill out forms, or you know what I mean? It
gives them contact information. It tells them we will help them fill out the form. They can find the forms on our website. We tell them where they can find the form. It offers to help. Just contact us, contact your principal, contact somebody.
Right. So that it's not just you owe this money, pay up kind of letter, right?
Absolutely
it's a very encouraging, let us work with you kind of letter is my understanding.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
It's also my understanding, tell me if I'm correct on this, that when we initially took this back in the notifications, et cetera, in-house, we did so, part of the reason we thought this was a good idea was so that then the district was aware of families that may all of a sudden be having this issue, that we could then reach out to them and be able to, find out what's going on, as
Right.
opposed to maybe, Armac wouldn't necessarily know that, wouldn't necessarily know the
Exactly.
families, right? Is that correct?
Yes.
When we did that, so.
Yes, and so that's why we try to work very closely with our principals.
Right.
Each month when we send out the letters, the principals get a list of who the letters are being sent out to, so that there can be communication multiple ways.
Right, because they know the students, and therefore we could then hopefully, if parents are receptive, again, kind of have some interventions if possible.
Right.
It's also my understanding that, and I don't know if we know what the percentage is, that not all of these accounts that are in arrears are necessarily from families that have a problem with paying
Correct.
for these accounts. There's other reasons why, but it's not a financial reason. Is that correct?
Correct.
Do we have a sense of, do we know what the percentage or?
I mean, I don't know the students well enough to know that.
But we do know that it's not all a matter of financial reasons why these things are not happening, right?
Yeah,
These
we've
accounts aren't
had
getting paid.
offers in the past to pay, donations towards it to pay some of the balances, and we have discouraged that because we know that it's not all about need. There's certainly mechanisms in place to help people who are in need.
Thank you.
Do we know what areas or what schools specifically or grades that we have the most delinquencies in? Or is it like pinpointed to a specific regions of the township or?
I would say that our the biggest area where we have the most delinquencies is at West, followed by Carusi. Mrs. Neary.
So a couple of things. One, my concern is when we talk about in arrears excess of $10, while that might seem like a lot as we raise our school lunch prices, and one meal is $3, by like that second meal or day two, for a family that might not qualify but is food insecure, we've already got a problem. So does that become a recipe to grow the problem versus curtail the problem? So we up the cost of lunch while our debts and arrears grow. I'm concerned. $10 and $20 may have seemed like a lot 15 years ago, but that doesn't seem like a lot to me now when a meal is $3.
Well, $10 is the threshold to go to the alternate meal, and then $20 would be the threshold to not serve the lunch. We can talk about adjusting those thresholds if we want to do that as well.
And then there's a paragraph in here, and I'm not sure if this is common amongst other districts, so I would like to understand that better, regarding the parent's refusal to meet or take other steps. And then the next step is to reach out and contact Child Protective Services. So is that the normal approach amongst other districts in a policy like that? And I think we have similar statements in the policy on the kindergarten at the bus as well.
Yes.
It seems somewhat threatening, and I don't know if that's the direction we want to go.
I can understand that, and certainly there was a district in Pennsylvania that was in the news a couple weeks ago who had sent out some letters to that effect, and we certainly are not interested, nor is the Department of Child Protective Services interested in us calling them, unnecessarily. If we were to make a call, and certainly the business office would never make that call based on an outstanding lunch balance. If that call was made, it would be more than likely from a school knowing that there are extenuating circumstances or there is something else going on here that goes way beyond just an outstanding lunch balance. But we are not interested in making that call. That is a part of the policy. It's a piece of the federal requirements for the policy. So that's why that language is in there and it's so strong.
Right, that's, Ms. Sugars, that's required by New Jersey statute, right? That's the
Yes.
NJSA 9:6-8. Like, that's literally the law in New Jersey. We don't have any choice but to put it in.
Yes.
I had a few questions. Regarding the tuna, so versus the special of the day, is there a cost savings to the tuna?
No.
And if I guess my follow-up question to that part would be, if there isn't a cost savings, I mean, obviously you have the other mechanisms in there, but why make the switch at $10, which is a fairly low threshold? I mean, in a week you certainly get to the $10 threshold. The second question, though, is, I mean, I agree it's a problem to have a policy that's not followed time and time again. It does encourage sort of cheating of the system. But, as I recall in the last year, this tuna fish situation has been probably the most talked about amongst the community. Now we're talking about taking the policy that was at least very humane, albeit not good, probably practice not to follow our own policy, and making it more severe. And I just think if the community is saying to us, listen, the tuna fish is a problem, leaving that lunchtime without food in, frankly, two schools that are significantly behind their peers, and now we're asking the kids to achieve when they're hungry. I mean, I definitely envision some backlash. Maybe the way to think about it would be to adjust the thresholds, I don't know, but I think this on its face is not going to help, matters, and people were upset enough as it was, I think, is just my opinion.
So if we adjust the thresholds if it's not 10 and 20 and we adjust it to 20 and 40, the problem still exists. I mean, we can adjust the thresholds all we want to 20, 40, 60, whatever we want, but we're still going to have the issue and the policy. Like, I think, sure, we can talk about what we want the threshold to be, but at the end of the day, the problem's still there. So I just think, we kind of want to talk about that. I mean, at the end of the day, we have people that are not paying lunches. To Lynn's point, or Ms. Sugar's point, like, it's an enterprise. And if we were looking at this from the eye of it's a business, we're in the service. I mean, this is our administration. Like, they're not here to make collection calls. So we kind of have to meet in the middle on this one. And it's difficult because there are children involved. So if it's not a tuna fish sandwich, if it's a lunch special or XYZ, but I think we kind of have to compromise on this one. Because if not, I mean, we're 14,000 now. By the end of next year, we could be 30, we could be 60. Because I can't remember the numbers before we put this into place when we wiped the balance clean.
I want to say it was around 25. Yeah.
So it's just going to kind of, I think the difficult thing is it is students who may or may not be getting a meal, but when parents are calling into the office saying it's the schools or the administration's fault or XYZ or I'm not paying it, I think that's maybe.
I think the issue for me is I feel that we are outreaching, we're trying to work with families. As I said before, we want them to fill out free and reduced lunch applications. We want to work with them. I think if we weren't making that outreach, that would be different. But we want them, we want to work with them. We want them to come to us and tell us how we can help them.
And we're providing the avenue to get the free and reduced lunch and fill out the papers. But I certainly agree. If we just raise the pricing if it's not 10 or 20, but I also think we could raise it to 20, 40 or whatever. The problem's still going to be there.
Thank you for asking about that, the time before when we forgave it and move on. So if we look at that, say approximately $25,000 that we forgave, and this time it's $14,000 approximately. So the procedures you put in place and how the problem is being addressed, just solely looking at those numbers, is being successful. It is addressing the issue. And as Mrs. Schultz pointed out, whether we raise the thresholds to whatever we raise it to, we still have the problem to address. And I think the problem to address is more what we need to look at. And it also is a business enterprise. And the hard part is that there are children involved, and our heartstrings are pulled when children are involved. So, it's hard to keep that balance and keep that in perspective when you're talking about children. So we just have to, take a look and do the best we can. We are making improvements. We are not following the policy as it is written. We've had a suggestion about raising the thresholds. To consider that, I'd like to see numbers because it is a business enterprise where does that put us in terms of paying for the services that we need to pay for? How much of a cushion do we have in order to do this before then we have to start talking about money coming from somewhere else in order to do this? So it's not as simple on the surface as we would like it to be, and it's difficult because it's our children we're talking about.
Right.
So there's a lot of things from my point of view to consider moving forward. So thank you for what you're doing and your department for what they're doing, and for the improvements that have been made to help address this, because we have seen some improvement. And, we'll keep looking forward. Hopefully, all of this will keep improving, but things move slowly in our world, which is difficult. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Do we know what the rate needs to be by school before school as a whole could qualify for free and reduced lunch or lunch? Because if we're talking about Weston Carusi, if we've already seen these are our at-promise kids who are most at risk, and to Ben's point, I don't want to see them go hungry, and even more concerned as we raise the price of lunch, exacerbating a problem we're already apparently struggling to grapple with. So is there a point where that becomes a possibility, maybe not for a district such as ours, but maybe at the school level? And then that it tends to eliminate the issue.
40%.
40%?
Yep.
And what are we roughly at, like 19 something?
District-wide, we're about 19%. I'm not sure. I'd have to look at what it is for those schools.
Those schools, okay.
Yeah.
One of the questions I had is I like the idea of potentially raising the thresholds, but I know that just could potentially exacerbate the problem even more. But I still like that idea of potentially raising those. But are there other methods? So what are all the methods that are currently being deployed now in terms of reaching out to the parents? And is it just the business office, or are they being reached out to from the school level where there may be a more personal relationship?
Yes, both. So when we send out letters, we send a list to the school. So we send it to the principal, so the principal is aware. Their guidance counselors are supposed to, at that point, be reaching out to individuals.
Parents or
to parents, yes. Okay. So yeah, because obviously they know their families better than we do up at the business office. So we ask for their help in that process. A letter is generated every 10 school days, yes.
So is it by U.S. mail, email?
The letter is done by mail.
Are there other methods that, like email, or is it just U.S. mail?
It's just mail. We don't email it at this point, but the schools make phone calls.
Okay.
Mrs. Stratton.
Thank you. You sort of already answered it. I was going to ask something similar to Eric, but for the 340 that are currently delinquent, do we know, and I'm not sure if you already said it, do we know how many of those students were students that could have qualified for free and reduced and just didn't do the forms over?
We don't know that because they have to fill out their information for us to know that. We don't know every individual person's income information. It's a form that they have to fill out.
Right. I mean, if they had it before.
We always follow up with those. Last year we did a letter to all of the families that had qualified the year before. We sent them a letter and said, just a reminder, you need to make sure that you're filling this form out again. So we do reach out to them. Sometimes we will literally have people come to us and respond to that letter in January. And those are the people that will help through the process and will erase balances up until that point if we can.
And do we know how many of those 340 are they, is the app part of the business as well? The app that you can use to make your payments and all of that kind of stuff?
So there's an online method to make payments into the account, yes, and that all flows into the same account. It's all part of the falls under the umbrella of the food service department and account.
Okay, and all of that's able to be translated into all the different languages you need and all of that
Yes.
as well? So
Yes.
are we doing anything? I did see some of the nice initiatives we did last year with the barbecues and whatnot
Yes.
to get people to sign. Are
Yeah.
we gonna do some of those same things in place and specifically target these two schools?
We are. We did one at Carusi last year?
We did a Cruci.
Yes.
We did it back. We had a very.
Right.
So this year we have Carusi already booked.
We talked Johnson kind of in the middle of the district, doing one there as well.
I'm just thinking we should probably target the places that we have the most issues with, some
Mhm.
of those new initiatives. And then I'm just thinking of the app, because if that's not translated as well, and if we're not looking at how many people are even downloading it and using it, then that's something that's going to waste as well, because I know as a parent, that's how I remember to make a payment. So,
Mhm.
just asking.
Mr. Vadia?
I think there may be something to the process map at the school. I mean, I think the business office is doing what the business office is trying to do, but if we're sending this as a list to the school, I just don't know, how quickly before the counselor meets with the child, let's say. And I mean, it just strikes me that for some of these folks, if these folks are not interested in paying and they're aggressive about it when the business office calls, there's got to be other things missing in this kid's life. School activity fees, whatever, clean clothes, I don't know. But it just seems like, actually, I mean, we're dealing with it just as kind of a financial calculation, but I think it's an indicator for something. What, I don't know. I mean, we'd have to study it maybe a little bit, but this is a potentially neglected population. If it's not need-based, and I would want us to dig into it, I think, I don't know. I mean, it's a lot of calls for, let's say, 2 people involved. I don't know. But to think about what's that process at the school level. My other question is, from an Aramark or from just a global perspective, this is nearly $20,000 out of a budget of what? That's sort of our school program district-wide.
$3 million.
$3 million, okay. So it's, okay, thanks.
So I guess, I know it's $14,000 and it's a very, very small amount in our $3 million budget, but so if we don't ask the $14,000 or we don't have a plan in place or a policy, why should anybody pay for their lunch? I mean, I don't want to just state the obvious, but we have to draw the line somewhere. And there are kids involved, and this is a really difficult conversation, but if you're not paying for your lunch and we're helping the parents apply for free and reduced lunch, and it's my understanding that if we reach out and somebody owes a balance, we're not even saying to the parents, you have to pay us the balance in full. We're saying, let us help you fill out the form and we'll help you get on the right path, and you don't even owe us that money today.
And in fact, if a child has an outstanding balance and shows up at the school with lunch money, we cannot apply it to the balance. We have to allow him to use it to purchase lunch
Right,
that
so I
day.
just want to maybe put that in perspective, that if a parent owes an outstanding balance of $20 and their circumstances have changed, and they call and say, my circumstances have changed, I need to apply for free and reduced lunch, we're not going to make them pay the balance that's due at this time. We will work with them. I mean,
Absolutely.
I feel that's also appropriate to add into the equation, but I know the number is small, but it will grow. And then we won't be able to buy a refrigerator in the cafeteria or a lunch truck, or we'll be firing the person who's serving the lunch because this, 14,000 becomes 25, becomes 50, and 50,000 is somebody's salary because this is really a difficult conversation. So I definitely appreciate the view, but I think if we don't want to do tuna fish, then give them a regular lunch, I think is maybe the way we look at it. If we don't want it to be 10 and 20, then come up with whatever that number should be. But we have to have a policy. It's a business enterprise account, and we have so many ways to work with families. Do a barbecue, target the Target West, Target Carusi, do all of those things to take these 343 people who have a lunch and specifically send them the letter with the form. But I think we just really need to take all of those things into consideration.
I would be remiss if I said it, the program is $3 million, but earn is.
Right. So our profit is 200, right?
Significantly higher percentage of what you'd have to invest back.
Right.
What'd you say? I didn't hear that.
So the entire program is $3 million. Our profit or our return at the end that we use to buy the equipment and those kinds of things is around 200,000. So
200,000.
you're talking really about that piece of it, not the whole $3 million budget.
Okay.
So can we then go back and see, I think that just drives the case even further to understand, do those two schools, depending upon their rates of free and reduced lunch, would those schools then qualify and perhaps eliminate this occurring debt going forward? Like, I know our district is at 19 or 20%, but what is it for Carusi and West? And then what does it need to be for the schools to qualify as a whole for lunch?
We can look into that.
I think that might make a difference.
Mrs. Stratton.
I was just gonna ask, what's the process for filling out the forms? How much backup does that require on a parent?
It doesn't really require any backup. They have to put in some calculations about what their annual income is or what their weekly income is. And they can do it online if they want to. We also have paper copies of the form. We have the form in English and Spanish. And they can certainly call my office handles that processing. Mrs. Wilson in my office is often on the phone with people, helping them through the process. They can reach out, in the kitchens to Aramark. They can help them as well.
So there's no like backup W-2s, income stubs, or
Only
anything like that?
only if there's a certain amount each year that we have to verify, and so if you're selected, which is a very small percentage, it's a handful of our families that qualify, have to go through a verification process. If you're selected for verification, you may have to provide some of that documentation, but otherwise, no. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sugars. So next, I don't think we have anything for HR. Am I correct on that? There is something for HR. So Mrs. Adrian.
Eric, I can read it out.
Oh.
It's small, but.
Okay.
So it's an update on recruitment. So to date, we have filled a total of 62.4 external hires, 35 internal hires, 8 replacement teachers, and we currently have 15 vacancies, 6 of which are replacement for teachers on leave. And that doesn't mean they're not filled, they just haven't come to HR yet.
Okay, thank you. Next, are there any questions on that before we move on? Okay, so next we have Dr. Smith, who's going to give us an update on policy and legislation items.
So, activity fee is an item up for discussion. We were going to talk about it at an earlier meeting and wanted to wait until we were all together. So, and we've looked at that through P&L now for some months. I made copies. This is the chart that we put together through our P&L committee that shows a district comparison of the activity fee, and it includes surrounding districts. You can see our activity fee is on the lower end by comparison with other districts. And so basically that was it, to have a discussion about whether we want to keep it as is, consider adjusting it, but in other words, to try to get to some resolution. So kind of like I think back to the remote attendance at board meetings, where that one we talked about over time, and to try to just bring it to some resolution. So whether we want to, and any change that we would make wouldn't be for this year, it would be for 2020, 2021. So.
Is there an administrative recommendation at this point, or is this just to get feedback on this issue?
Feedback.
Okay.
This was a board-generated discussion and request for information. So the members of P&L requested additional information. There were some members on the committee who felt that we were not charging enough. So we had an initial discussion at the end of the academic year, and then because of the time frame when we send stuff out, the discussion really had to go for the following year. So on the administrative side, we're literally just providing the information and looking to see if the board is interested in. But it came from board request.
So it came from P&L discussion.
What it was
So
was,
let me ask then.
It
P&L
it
to
was
fill us
part.
in.
It was part of a discussion. Well, P&L's has been decimated, but when we existed as a committee, of more than just one or two, but yeah, when we were looking at alternative funding and other ways of having funding for the district, one of the things that a member had brought up was maybe we should take a look at the activity fees as something that could be raised, because it has not been ever raised. We've always been on the low end, and I believe we've never raised them since we implemented them back in, was it 2009? So like 10 years ago. So that's when we said, okay, we kind of put everything on the table. One of the things we had recommended, which we had discussed, was facility fees also, but we kind of passed that over to BNF. But just looking at a number of different things, where do we generate, how do we generate revenue? Are we being efficient and effective in generating revenue? So that's where this came from.
What was that member's recommendation?
I believe, I don't want to, the member's not here right now, but if I remembered the discussion, they felt that it might not be a bad idea to do that, but that it'd be something that we should discuss as a board, because again, my feeling on it was, I think we are low, I think we could increase it, but I analogize it to the airlines, right? Like, if the ticket costs $50 extra, it doesn't bother you as much as them nickel and diming you on the bags and the meals and the peanuts. And I worry that people will perceive it as us nickel and diming them, which will just aggravate the community, even though we are very low compared to most districts, obviously. And also with the bond referendum coming up and things like that. So that's why we thought this needs a broader discussion. It's not just about activity fees. It kind of plays into a lot of different things.
So it wasn't the committee's recommendation that we raise the fee?
No, there wasn't a consensus on the committee on that. It was something that we felt that because of all these other moving parts, the full board should probably talk about.
Okay.
Yeah, so I know that when we initially implemented this activity fee, it was because the district had taken a huge hit. A lot of our funding was taken away by the state. I think like half of our funding was taken away by the state, and we wanted to continue the programs, and this was just another way to try to bring in additional revenue to help those various activities. I know we're still underfunded, significantly underfunded, but we have started getting some increases in our funding. And I honestly, so given our last discussion about school lunches, I would want to just leave things as is for right now. As you know, like one of the things that we did back then was, you know, we put this in place because we lacked those funds. But not that we gotten a whole lot of additional funds, but we have gotten some. And so I would be in favor of leaving this as is for now, in like next couple of years, and see how our funding goes, and if we really feel like it needs to be increased as we hopefully get more funding from the state, then we can review it again at that time. That's my thoughts.
I agree, Mr. Goodwin.
I agree with that.
That's a moment. We can move that topic to the side. So great. And the next one on there was parent attendance at school bus stop. So and you're able to look that up. It's policy 8603. The particular line in there that I think or could use some more discussion is where it says the parent may designate a responsible person to be at the bus stop, and that's it's a broad phrase, you know, responsible person. So just for clarification, are there further specifics, I guess, that could be elicited for what that looks like? Responsible person, like, for example, a sibling, if a sibling of a certain age, just as, you know, just for in order to interpret it when it comes up.
So what was brought up earlier, I don't know exactly the specifics between this one and walking home from school. Is what are the differences, or do you know those differences?
So the key difference is that with the bus, if that responsible person is not at the bus stop, then the bus will return the kindergartner to the school. So whereas in a school situation, if that responsible person is not there, then the student's not released from the school. So in this case, as I've explored this, it seems like it's been roughly in talking with our transportation office, it's been roughly the lower threshold of age has been around a sophomore in high school, as someone who's a responsible person there. But I know that that age is not always a determination of maturity and responsibleness. So it's the broadness of that word, responsible.
I guess the question I have, and what was brought up earlier. So now that we're talking about, I'll start off with the scenario I heard about that I was really concerned, where a kindergartner was dropped off at a stop, and this was in the middle of the day, and there was not a responsible. The bus driver misunderstood and thought that person standing out there was that kid's parents or a responsible person, but it wasn't. And that was a huge issue. And it was resolved. The kid was safe, but we never want to have anything like that happen. But on the flip side, now that we're talking about all-day kindergarten, I guess one of the questions I have is, if there's siblings on that same bus, does it make sense that that person would go home with their sibling? I don't know what the liability or issues would be around that, but that would be my question.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah.
The policy for walkers
Mm.
is the language, and I don't know it to have it. I don't have the number to pull up in front of me. Is the language the same, and that a responsible person is supposed to be there, or do we, as the person said earlier, do we allow younger children to walk home together, including kindergartners? Like if you had PM kindergarten, and then your third grade is walking home, does the kindergartner get to walk home with a third grader?
There's more allowance within the how walkers are handled. So a walker can walk home.
A kindergarten walker can walk home.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I guess I'm not understanding then what the difference with the bus versus the walking policy, or why there's a difference.
The bus policy is stricter. You know, it's clearly delineated that the responsible person has to be there. And that's where the sort of, what does that look like? What is the responsible person look like? Your point, Mr. Gwynn, about like if a sibling's getting off the bus along with the like a third grade sibling, that student, that's not just that third grader isn't just any old third grader. That's a person who's taken that bus for several years and has probably done that same walk home for several years. So does that kind of increase their responsibleness in that case versus someone who's never done it before? But third grade is also third grade, so yeah.
Oh, sorry. I forget that I'm not that loud then. That these policies should be the same, because if they could be a walker, right, up to 2 miles? Is that what it? 1 mile?
1 mile.
Elementary, 1 mile, okay. Sometimes that walk from the bus to home could be even less.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not letting them, but we're letting them walk, possibly by themselves. I actually think the risk of exposure is greater, that these policies are different. Like, it should be one policy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we should just figure out what that looks like.
Mm-hmm. So I did, because we have our P&L committee has a chart where we look at other districts' policies as we looked at creative revenues or F1 visa or remote attendance. And I struggled to find a district that has this specific policy about parent attendance at bus stops. So, we can look at both together, and maybe that's what we need to do, to further delineate, is look at them both together.
Yeah, I think that, oh, sorry, Kara. I do think that would be a good idea to have them sort of mirror each other and not be so different. And again, I don't really understand why the bus would be stricter than the walking in the first place. I would think it would be the reverse. But in any event, I think they should be consistent with each other. And again, with full day, maybe it does make sense now to change who is a responsible person for either.
What's the policy for the students that go to the SAC program that are picked up for? I know they have to probably have a best practice. I know they don't do licensing, but what is their rules for their pickup in terms of responsible person and all of that?
So they have to be picked up, so they can't just exit SAC. So that's and the person picking them up is known on a list. So they're identified in advance. I think it's the that responsible person phrase, I think, is we could also look at what SAC does, and maybe we want to borrow some language from that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that if we're looking at alignment, to your point of it all making sense together and being cohesive, there's wording specific to who can pick up, who you can put on that list. And I don't know if it's the same as it was years before, but at time it was very specific as to what type of person can be on your child's pickup list, and maybe we should look at the 3.
It's really specific. So when my children were in SAC previously, you had to identify those individuals up front, and they had to show identification. So like my mother-in-law went to get them and they wouldn't release them, which she was actually very pleased about. So because she, for whatever reason, we failed to put her on the list, and they cleared for that. So I don't know that that would be, I mean, it's good to see what the language is, but I don't know that we could practically implement that for the bus, but there's got to be language that's.
No, I'm definitely, I mean,
Yeah.
we can't have bus drivers pulling over and IDing who's at the bus stop, right? Like, that would take forever for everybody to go home. But
Yeah.
if we could look at if they say, because I don't know, it's been a long time since my child was in SAC, but I know at one time they were specific as to being at a certain age to have someone on the pickup list. Even if it was a sibling, they still needed to be a certain age to come to the school to pick up. So maybe that's kind of my thinking.
Can I just ask a question? Because school starts in approximately 14 days. So are we trying to have this, I guess, in place by our August meeting so that we know how to communicate what the policy is going to be at the start of school? Is that the goal or the objective? Because that could be kind of confusing for our bus drivers with new kindergarten and our parents. And I guess I would even say to Lori's point, like a 3rd grader and a 1st grader, if we don't communicate it properly at the start of the school, we could have an issue.
So my current understanding in looking into this is that that responsible person threshold at its youngest has been a sophomore in high school. Okay, so looking at how it's been interpreted in practice, that's what I've found out. Were I asked, were someone to ask me, or were a question to come my way, that's how I would respond and try to work it through with the family.
Okay.
That's, to my understanding, has worked as a practical application or understanding of this. But I think that we have some time to do a deeper dive and look at these 3 pieces together: our dismissal plan in general, including the walkers, this bus stop piece, and the SAC piece.
And
Is there an option for us to maybe say that parents can sign a waiver saying they're okay with, I give permission for such and such sibling, or permission to drop my student if there's no one there, or is that not an option?
So the way the policy is written right now, until the policy changes, the policy is the policy, right? But the policy does say the parent may designate a responsible person to be at the bus stop, right? So the parent's going to need to identify that. If the parent, at least my interpretation, we'd certainly ask Paul, as solicitor, but if the parent designates that their 6-year-old who's in 1st grade or their 7-year-old in 2nd grade is the responsible person, then the parent will designate that child as the responsible person, and we will accept that based on what the policy says right now, because there is no age differentiation that's in here for it. It literally just talks about pre-kindergartners and kindergartners, that are on there. But I think that gives, and that can be communicated with Dr. Smith through the principals, the elementary principals, to go out, and the information that goes home to parents and kindergartners, that they're going to need to designate who's going to take their child, off the bus. But it still gives us time to continue the discussion that's there. Because right now it just says the parent will may designate a responsible person to be at the bus stop.
So can they say, I don't want anybody? Like, can I be like, oh, I don't.
Right now, they have to
need
designate a
anyone.
responsible
Has to be
person.
someone
Yeah,
there.
right now they cannot. They can't just say that my kindergartner can walk on their own. They have to designate a responsible person if they're not there.
How do they have to designate it? Has to be in writing? How is this communicated?
So we can determine that, and we can go back through either what the regulation says, and if nothing else, we can send a form home, can go home with the kindergartners, and the parents.
So if the policy's written so the parents can designate their 6-year-old, their 1st grader, 2nd grader, whoever the case may be, do we want to then revise it to, or doesn't the policy work then as is?
Yes. So the question would be, do you still want to have them designate for kindergarten, right? Is that the board's determination? You know what I mean? God bless you. I mean, because at least right now, the parent can be a responsible person. That's up to the parent to make the determination who a responsible person is.
But that's kind of what, I guess, the avenue you were going down, Mr. Adden, with that was saying that's essentially having the parent at least let the school know this is who I designate to pick up my kindergarten. I would think we would want that. I mean, my opinion. I mean, is that could in the same way, kind of like with SAC, like these are the designated people that can pick my kindergarten, either the sibling, myself, or it's almost like putting that form in the a packet that goes home on the first day of school with all the other paperwork that we asked for back.
Right, we would actually send it out with the kindergartners before the first day of school, so that we had it that day. But right.
And to your point earlier, when you were talking about the third grader, who is very young, you know, we're talking like 8 or 9 years old, but they do have that experience of walking from the bus to their house, many years experience, and this policy is taking a look at preschoolers and now our full-day kindergartners who do not have that experience. So, you know, the fact that we, you know, have it written that the parents need to designate a responsible person to guide that person, that child, home until they gained that experience of coming from the bus stop to their house, which may only be a block or two, but still can be confusing to a young child. Right now it says the parent can designate their responsible person, who in a parent's eyes, you know, I mean, I have 4 kids, and I could tell you a couple of them that a third grade would have been very responsible, and some who may not have been responsible enough to designate as that person. You know, so the parent still has that option.
Yeah.
I remember from like a P&L meeting, Dr. Malash, that you told me a story that you were a kindergarten safety and they trusted you to walk the entire kindergarten class all the way down the street.
Not all of them. I think there's only 5 of them. Yeah, when I was in 6th grade, because the kids the morning kindergarten 11:30, we would go down at 25 after 11, and I would walk them from Kingston. We go down King George, cross the stop sign. I would cross them across Chapel, and then there were 4 that lived the other side of Chapel, and I would send the 4 of them down King George, you know, to whoever. One was on Kingsley, one was on King George, but yeah.
So
That was like teacher superintendent material right there. That's what I'm thinking.
I did want to ask the question. So as far as just from a logistical standpoint, how is that bus driver supposed to know who's a kindergartner, who's a first grader, who's a third grader? I don't understand how that's supposed to work, especially since everybody's going to be, it's full day kindergarten now. So everyone's going to be getting on the bus, getting off the bus.
So I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was wondering, and I want to say, by the way, that I'm glad that we put activity fee to the side, because I feel like now we've got like a really meaty one to work on for P&L meetings for the next few months. But you know, if the bus company itself if there's other sort of thresholds or facets to this that maybe that are specific to that, you know. So for example, like the bus driver, you know, how looking into what's their own policy as a bus company as far as you know, what they expect from. So which would be a variable that would make it different from walkers or dismissal.
And the bus drivers each have a list that has the children by stop by grade level, so it lists what grade they are in.
But so I guess the bus driver is supposed to become quickly familiar with which kid is which.
They are, but I'll tell you, it's also one of the reasons the buses are a little bit slower the first week of school or so.
Oh, okay.
We got to make sure the right kids get on them and the right kids get off them at the right spots. So yes, that's the bus driver's responsibility. Another reason it makes it attractive for people who want to be bus drivers.
All right. So thanks, to be continued. Thanks for those thoughts, everyone.
All right, thank you, Dr. Smith. And our final update as for the committee of the whole is going to be strategic planning, and I'm going to turn it back to Mrs. Sugars.
the best we can do. Barbara needs to get out of. Oh, it's Justin. Okay. Barbara. All right. So tonight we're going to start with, we're going to do a project update. We're going to start with Kilmer Elementary School, our refurbishment project. Where we are to date, there is still some work that needs to be done. We have staging and finishing touches. We still have some furniture that's coming. Teachers are returning to work next week. Those that want to get into those classrooms and get them fixed up. The goal of the project was to, first of all, get as much as we can on wheels in terms of furniture so that each summer cleaning will be much easier. Also so that teachers have some flexibility within the classroom, can configure the desks the way that they want to and move things around. To use materials that are easy to clean, to eliminate carpets and fabric and old paper and all things that can create environmental issues. Also to clean up and clean out. We love our elementary school teachers, but we know that our elementary school teachers have a lot of stuff. So this was an opportunity for them to kind of go through some of that stuff and do a little cleaning up. Tremendous amount of planning went into this project that started in the spring with working with contractors. We, if you recall, awarded a bid for painting, a time and material bid for painting, and that was very helpful with this project. We also worked with some consortium vendors for the flooring. So we're very excited about this, and I'm going to show you some highlights. I have a lot of slides, but we'll move through them pretty quickly. So these are some of the before pictures. You can see the condition of the classrooms. If you note the lighting at the top, how it's kind of that drop-down lighting there. The brown area in the first picture are these kind of recycled newspaper bulletin boards that were up in the classroom. So those are some of the things that we were able to get rid of. In this picture, you can see some of the cornices above. There were sort of these cornices that went above the windows there. Just hadn't been updated in a really long time. Again, a lot of our classrooms had, in the back of Kilmer, had these large rectangular carpeted areas in the middle of the room, which was, at one point, I guess made sense, but years later, the carpet's still original. There's been stripper spilled on it. There's been floor wax spilled on it. There's been, I'm sure, a myriad of other things spilled on it. So it was time to kind of clean some of that up and get rid of that. One of the unique issues that we have at Kilmer are these folding classroom walls in several of the classrooms there. Again, I know at some point open concept classrooms was a thing, but we're left with these dividing walls in the classroom. So we wanted to the material on those was sort of like a grass cloth, which is not necessarily a material that we want to work with at this point. So we covered a lot of those walls with RFP panels, which is like a plastic coating on top of them. Makes them easier to clean, brightens up the room. So that was part of the project. Also, if you can note in this picture, that drop-down lighting that we saw earlier was replaced with lighting that was flush in the ceiling, and ceiling tiles replaced in all the classrooms. Here's some more older pictures. Again, you can see here are the original unit ventilators. You know, we had talked during the referendum about how the boilers had been replaced, but not the piping and the actual classroom units, which are mostly original to the buildings. Hopefully that's something we can upgrade as we move with our next referendum project. And again, here's another classroom that has kind of that carpet square in the middle. And then there's a view out into the hallway, and again, some of the older classroom stuff. Again, here we go, original cabinetry. This is in some of the kindergarten rooms. We had kind of these built-in wardrobe cabinets and these sink cabinets that, again, original to the building, pretty beat up, needed to be replaced. And we can see, you know, some of the condition that they're in and what's going on there. This is one of the newer classrooms that's in the back wing of the building. This wing is about 20 years old. The cabinetry is in much better shape. The rooms themselves are not in bad shape. We did do some floor replacements and painting in those rooms as well, upgraded the ceiling and the lighting as well. So here we are in progress, pulling out some of that cabinetry, removing asbestos tile floors, taking out ceiling grids in some of the classrooms. And again, you can see the ceiling grids are out, the floor's been removed, applying a thin set layer to kind of even out the floors before we put the new tile down. And then here we are in progress. We're getting the floors down. We're getting some of the paint up. On the right-hand side, you can see that piece there that has the clock, had the clock and the speaker and the phone and all that. That was the mechanism, where the mechanism was stored for those classroom walls that would open and, I assume, opened and closed at some point. So we needed to do some dressing up in that area as well. So now we have, you know, our upgraded classroom ceilings, paint, lighting, RFP panels on the walls, asbestos floors removed. The classroom on the right, the blue floor, that tile was in decent shape. It was not asbestos, so we kept that tile. A little different than the neutral tones that we were going for, but there was really no reason to remove it. It was still in decent shape. Actually looked better once we got some wax on it. So we left some floors in that had been replaced recently. And again, you can see completed work in some of the classrooms, and we have ordered some new cabinets to replace some of those older cabinets that we were able to remove. You see there some of the new cabinets that are coming in. They haven't been installed yet, but that's on the list. And again, some of those classrooms, if you noticed on the left-hand side, the picture there were some classrooms that had cabinetry in them that we had to remove. We weren't removing the floors, but we removed the cabinetry, so then we had a gap. So we tried to choose some kind of neutral flooring that would kind of mix in with that. So some classrooms will have a strip down the side. That'll be covered up with new storage and new furniture, but we had to put something in that area too, since we weren't taking out the entire floor. Again, we have some rooms that have a green strip in them as well. So this is a completed classroom. You can see kind of what it looks like there with the new floors, the wax down, the new ceilings, the lighting, the RFP panels covered, the painting. So it's kind of a fresh start that we know our teachers will come in and put their stamp on and decorate them up. This was a staging area in the all-purpose room where the new furniture came in, was put together, and then is in the process of being distributed. And you can see, again, everything is on wheels to make it easy to move. Here's a classroom with some of those. Again, we talked about the desks and how teachers can reconfigure them and use them in different formations. Even within a school day, they can change things around and move them around. And in the back of the picture, you can see some of the storage units. Those are on wheels as well. Again, making the rooms very flexible and easy to use. The green marker board or blackboard that you see in the back, we've ordered some marker board skins to go on top of them. So we're waiting for those to come in as well. And this is one of our, two of our kindergarten classrooms. We ordered some new furniture for the kindergarten classroom, and we also had some furniture already. So our kindergarten classrooms will be a mix of old and new. Some of our new chairs, some of our cubbies, and then the storage units on the right that you see there, those are replacing the wardrobe closets that we had removed. Again, laminated, no fear of, you know, any kind of environmental issue with that, on wheels so that they can be moved. They're very big and roomy, and they store lots of things, so that's good. Cubbies and coat hooks and shelving and things like that for coats and stuff like that. Again, more furniture, storage, and again, you can see how some of those things can be reconfigured. This is a teacher desk that you see there on the left, on wheels, movable, new plastic. And then on the right, you can see a completed hallway. The bulletin boards just came in this week, so where we had bulletin boards before, we'll be hanging bulletin boards again in an effort to hopefully keep things off the walls. Nicely, freshly painted walls. We want to keep the stuff off the walls and put them on the bulletin boards. We'll also be putting some cork stripping in. And this is that mechanism piece that I talked about before where it was stored. That was the original, and then that's the cleaned up version with the new clock and painted and all of that good stuff. So here is some comparisons of hallways, the old versus the new. This is the newer wing in the back. You can see there that the tile was in bad shape. We had done some patchwork with that. And so that has all new tile and new paint in that hallway there. Oh, that's the same hallway. Yep, it's the same hallway. And again, the back hallway there in the process of being renovated, and what it looks like completed. That's back in the newer wing of the building. Again, this is the hallway that runs down the courtyard side before and after. And this is the back hallway. If you come in off the parking lot side there, that's the hallway that comes in off the parking lot. This is the office area. You can see kind of the main entrance area there and where the main office is. And that's the updated version with the paint. We're also doing a process on the flooring called diamond grinding. We had to buy machinery to do that. And the great thing about that is we don't have to use stripper. We don't have to use wax. There's no chemicals involved. And we get the shine that you see there, and it lasts for much longer than the wax does. So we'll be doing this. We have a lot of terrazzo throughout the district, and we'll be doing that to our terrazzo floors instead of using stripper and wax. Cuts down on workers' comp injuries, all those kinds of things. So that's a good thing. And there's the main entrance area there, before and after. This is the nurse's office before, some old cabinetry that we had there. Cabinetry, the new cabinetry hasn't come in yet, but this is it, painted and new ceiling and new flooring in that as well. This is the media center, process of removing the flooring and the ceiling, you can see that. And on the right-hand side, we have new ceilings, new lighting, new paint, and new carpet tiles. Those are carpet tiles, which is great. If there's a spill or an issue, you just pull out the tile, put a new one in. This is the APR. We were in the process of removing the floor there. The APR had kind of a two-tone color scheme going on in there. This is in process, and this is the final product. We have not completed all the work in there yet. We still need to wax the floors since that has sort of been our staging area and storage area. We haven't completed that room yet. This is one of the little funky bathrooms that is off the side of the all-purpose room. It sort of was half bathroom and half storage area, and it has literally bothered me since the moment I got in the district. So, you know, it was in the referendum to be renovated. We were able to do some of the renovations while we did this. We're waiting for partitions to come in, and eventually we'll build a wall that will divide those two areas so that there will be a storage room and there will be a bathroom. We have a boys and a girls room like that. So this is the faculty lounge, and I know we have a couple of these units throughout the district. We have joked that they probably belong in the Smithsonian, and I don't know if the fire marshal would today allow us to have a unit that has both a sink and a stove in it in one unit. I don't know where these came from. I know there's some throughout the district, but you can see the before and after there. New cabinetry. We will put a sink in the on the right-hand side there. We just haven't done that piece yet. So here's some additional pictures of the faculty room. They had some decent furniture in there that they had purchased recently, so we kept that furniture, but we took down, we're going to get some new mailboxes and cubbies. And if you look at the picture on the left-hand side in the bottom corner, yes, that brown unit that is hanging down there was a throwback, I assume, had to be 60s, 70s, when I assume teachers were smoking in the faculty lounge. And that unit would draw out the cigarette smoke. As you know, we are not permitted to smoke on school grounds, so we don't have anybody doing that now. But, you know, again, a throwback to the past that we were able to take care of through this renovation. And this is the mural that's at the end of the hallway, and I'm really pleased with how this turned out, because I think now that we have the lighter paint, you can see the mural much more clearly. So that's where we are today. We still have, again, as I said, some furniture and some other things going on there that we will see implemented in the next couple weeks. And I believe that we will have an open house at some point so that people can come in and see it. And we're going to invite the principals to come over to see it and make them all jealous, so they can see that work that was done there as well. So in terms of what else needs to be done at Kilmer, interior doors now are really going to stick out. There's a lot of original interior doors in that building that need to be replaced, and now that we have all this new flooring and paint, they really kind of stick out. Still need to do the security suite work there, HVAC work. You know, we still need to do that. That was part of the referendum. We have a lot of window lintel work that needs to be done as well. So there's still projects that need to go on there. Still, some of that will be done through the referendum. But you know, we certainly were able to make some much needed improvements there. And so a couple of other projects that we have going on this summer. Roofing work. We did replace the roof at the West Gym, Jones Gym at West. It's nearly complete. We have some minor work that needs to be done. Mann Elementary School is about 80% complete. We have some change orders that you will see at the next board meeting for some additional work that needs to be done. We've also had some significant asphalt damage as part of this project, unfortunately, in the playground area. The asphalt was not in great shape when the project started. It is not it's in terrible shape now, from tractor trailers bringing materials in, from loaders loading materials on the roof. So we're negotiating with the contractor at this point how we're going to remedy that situation, because that's something that has to be done before school starts. Security vestibules at high school east and west, the bid opening for that project is September 5th. So we're hoping to award that at the September 10th board meeting. Beck, if you recall, last year we did the locker project. There was a lot of lockers that we did not need, and so we did not replace. So we've removed those, replaced that with drywall. Fencing bid, we did a fencing bid. You will recall that we had one a couple of months ago that we did not award. We only had one bidder, and we weren't familiar with them. They were out of New York, and it was way over our budget. So we did a second bid. It's also way over budget. I think our needs are probably more than what our budget can sustain, but we're going to prioritize some of those areas and hopefully award that bid at the next board meeting. And then we have the East Auditorium wall work. The scaffolding and the fencing is going up. We expect this work to begin shortly. We are contracting with a construction management firm for this project. That's on your agenda tonight. Funding for that project is coming out of the project funds. The reason we feel that this is a necessary step is because of the complicated nature of this project. This firm has both architects and engineers that will be involved with part-time management of this project. They will work very closely with Mr. Bart, who manages all of our capital projects. And so we have a rate sheet which is attached to the documentation that you have at your table. And we estimate that the cost on this will be approximately $42,000. And again, that money will come out of the project funds. Moving on to some of our ADA work, parking lots and signage. We'll be working with Environmental Resolutions, which is a civil engineering firm. They also work with the township. They're beginning with a topographic and existing condition survey and site visits to develop concept plans, which will give us a great roadmap to make sure all the items that we need to address are being addressed properly. It's going to take about 6 months for them to complete that work, but they said that they will share the information with us as they get it, so that we can start implementing some of those changes rather than waiting until they're completed. There was a recent complaint filed with the state concerning the Woodcrest vestibule about whether or not it was compliant from an accessibility standpoint. The state determined that it was 100% compliant. However, there were some issues with striping on the handicap parking spot for vans that need to be restriped, which we knew was going to be addressed through this work. So that'll be a priority for us to address first. Stage accessibility, bid opening for that project is September 12th. Portable lift is in the process of being purchased. We're not aware of a consortium or a state contract vendor for that item, so we're using a quotation process for that. That'll make the process a little more complicated. But that lift will be portable. We can move it from school to school where it's needed, and we'll have that available until the stage work is completed. Stockton and Beck will have lifts installed for their stages. Stockton will entail major movement of HVAC ductwork and domestic hot water piping. It's estimated that this project will be completed in December, depending on the lead time for the lifts. Hart and Cooper will have ramps installed. Hart will also entail movement of HVAC piping. It's estimated that Cooper will be completed in October and Hart will be completed in November. For the West Auditorium, we're under contract with 2 contractors from this project. One who will provide the equipment and the commissioning and the design, and the other who will do the install. There's 2 projects going on at West in the new auditorium. It'll be to move the sound and lighting boards into the booth at the back of the auditorium to reestablish the handicap seating area. And in the old auditorium, it'll be to bring the lighting and sound installation up to speed because East will be using that auditorium for some of their performances next year since their auditorium is shut down for the year. Other projects that we've had going on, once we got done painting at Kilmer, we were able to start painting at some of our other buildings. So we were able to do the main hallway at West, since we're doing the vestibule there. So we did the main hallway, the hallway that leads back to the cafeteria, and the cafeteria. So it looks really nice. I hate to for all of the views that like the purple, I'm sorry to say the purple is going. So we were able to do that. And then also we've been able to do the main hallways and the all-purpose room at Mann as well. So so we were able to get that done. We've done some paving both at Cooper and Payne. And then, of course, our annual cleaning is going on. That's going on. We're in crunch time at this point, trying to get our buildings ready for the start of school. We're doing some lighting retrofits at Mann. And I'm sure you've noticed that we've had a lot of tree work and curb appeal work going on throughout the district. They actually removed some very, very large pine trees out of West today that were in the courtyard that were problematic because they were clogging roof drains and causing some other issues. So, you know, it was kind of neat to see that those come down. So lots of work going on, lots of things going on throughout the district as we get ready for everybody to come back in a couple weeks. And we're very excited about that. Are there any questions? Mrs. Matlack.
No question. I just want to say what a dramatic difference the pictures at Kilmer were. It looks so bright. You know, some of it looks brand new,
Yeah.
just with the paint and the flooring. So, you know, congratulations on that, and thank you.
You're welcome, and you know, it's been a joint effort. You know, Mr. McCarty, our facilities director, has been working very hard to make all of that happen. Mr. Bart has been working really hard on all of our other projects. So, you know, we're very happy with that. And I have to say, the pictures don't do it justice. So it really, when you see it in person, it really is dramatic. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Sugars. So next on our agenda, we're going to jump into our action agenda. And I happen to be the first one on that agenda to move the CNI items. And let me get to that. Just was on it, but let me see. So can you just read it? I can't get it. All right. So for the okay, for CNI, we have 4 items. I'm going to read the first 3, and I'm going to ask Paul to read the last item there. So the superintendent recommends, and I move the following: approval of attendance at conferences and workshops for the 2019 to 2020 school year, approval agreements for 2019-2020 school year, 17,500 and under, and approval of professional service agreements for the 2019-2020 school year. And the final item, Mr. Green.
Resolved that the Cherry Hill Board of Education approves the settlement agreement in the administrative action filed under OAL docket number EDS 01181-19 and authorizes its president and secretary to execute same on behalf of the board for submission to the administrative law judge assigned to this matter.
Do I have a second? Mrs. Matlack. Any questions? Okay, if not, Mrs. Sugars.
Mr. Goodwin,
Yes.
Mrs. Matlack,
Yes.
Mrs. Neary,
Yes.
Mr. Avadia,
Abstain.
Mrs. Scarpolino,
Yes.
Mrs. Schultz,
Yes.
Mrs. Stratton,
Okay. All right. Next up, I'm going to ask Mrs. Schultz to move the BNF items, please.
The superintendent recommends, and I move the following. Letter A, approval of appointments. Number 1, approval of bill list. Number 2, resolution for the award of bids. Number 3, resolution approving an extraordinary unspecifiable service contract with New Road Construction Management Company Incorporated for construction management services. Number 4, resolution for the award of transportation. Number 5, resolution for the award of change orders. And number 6, approval of Cherry Hill McKinney Vento DCP&P student going out of district for the 2019-2020 school year. Do I have a second? Mrs. Neary, are there any questions? Seeing none, Mrs. Sugars?
Mrs. Schultz,
Yes to all.
Mrs. Matlack,
Yes.
Mrs. Neary,
Yes.
Mr. Avadia,
Abstain.
Mrs. Scarpolino,
Abstain as to the second bill list where my name appears. Yes to the remainder.
Mrs. Stratton,
Abstain.
Mr. Goodwin.
Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Schultz. And next, I'm going to ask Mrs. Neary to move the HR items, please.
Okay. The superintendent recommends, and I move the following. Number 1, termination of employment certificated. Number 2, termination of employment non-certificated. Number 3, appointments certificated. Number 4, appointments non-certificated. Number 5, contract renewal, SAC program. Number 6, assignment salary change certificated. Number 7, assignment salary change non-certificated. Number 8, other compensation certificated. Number 9, other compensation non-certificated. And there's also a pink sheet that you have with changes to number 1, termination of employment certificated. Number 2, termination of employment non-certificated. Number 3, appointment certificated. Number 4, appointments non-certificated. Number 7, assignment salary change non-certificated. And number 8, other compensation certificated. Do I have a second? Mrs. Schultz, are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, Mrs. Sugars.
Mrs. Neary,
Yes.
Mrs. Matlack,
Yes.
Mr. Avadia,
Abstain.
Mrs. Scarpolino,
Yes.
Mrs. Schultz,
Yes.
Mrs. Stratton,
Abstain.
Mr. Goodwin.
Yes. And I'm going to turn it to Dr. Malash for introduction of one of the people we just approved.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. So I'm very excited to reintroduce most of you and to introduce some of you to our newest supervisor who you just approved, Mrs. Allison McCartney. Mrs. McCartney. Allison has been in the role of teacher coach in the district. She has worked at the secondary level, the middle schools and the high schools, in English and language arts. Many of you have seen her either at board meetings or CNI meetings talking about some of the new texts, summer reading, some of the programs we've done in English language arts. And she was just approved tonight as one of the 3 curriculum supervisors for the district. So congratulations, Ms. McCartney. Do you want to say anything? No? Well, you could just come around and shake everybody's hand.
Okay. So next on the agenda, I'm going to ask, thank you, Ms. Neary, for moving those items. And next on the agenda, I'm going to ask Mrs. Scarpolino to move the P&L items, please.
Certainly, Mr. Goodwin. The superintendent recommends, and I move the following. Number 1, approval of harassment, intimidation, bullying, investigation, hearing decisions. Do I have a second? Mrs. Schultz. Are there any questions? Seeing none, Mrs. Sugars.
Mrs. Scarpolino?
Yes.
Mrs. Matlack?
Yes.
Mrs. Neary?
Yes.
Mr. Avadia?
Abstain.
Mrs. Schultz?
Yes.
Mrs. Stratton? Abstain. Mr. Goodwin?
Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Scarpolino. We don't have any strategic planning items for today, so we're going to go to our second public comment section. In this section, you can comment on any item. We just ask that you give your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes to make your comments.
Rick Short, 1002 Shelton Parkway. Thank you, Ms. Sugars, for clarifying the amount of money of $42,000 for new road construction. That's being very transparent. Thank you very much. I want to get real quick talking about the tuna fish controversy. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about 3% population. This is not a crisis. It is so hilarious how at a blink of a wand you can spend $200,000 for a power pit at Cherry Hill East that can go to $1.4 million, and we're worried about $14,000 bankrupting us? That is ridiculous. You've profited over $200,000 last year, according to Aramark. There's other ways to fix this. I would suggest, Mr. Goodwin, that you erase the $14,000, you start again from zero. What they proposed was 4 different tuna fishes. That's hilarious. That's called food shaming. You're still food shaming. You've just doubled down by saying you're going to cut people off. This is ridiculous. There is another way to fix this. Now let's get into really what I wanted to talk about. Okay, I'd like to invite the superintendent, Dr. Marlash, Mr. Saporito, and the entire board to a upcoming gun security demo on August 26th at the Rancocas Valley High School. It's going to be sponsored by former board member Nancy Odell, who's also a candidate running for Cherry Hill mayor. I'd also like you to look into some of the new panic alarms that people are starting to use. One of them is RaveMobileSafety.com. These mobile panic alarms would be tremendous, especially for like a fight. You know, there are occasional fights that break out in some of the high schools and middle schools. They can press it and they can call specific people for backup. I also wanted to get into talking about the $1.9 million that is available through the CAP program. I would suggest, Mr. Goodwin, that you take this $1.9 million, which is the same amount of money for security that you were put in for the bond, and immediately do it. I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to get to all this. No, it's too bad, unfortunate. I'm going to run out of time. And one other thing to mention about the permits, I believe, and I'm not 100% sure, but I did call the township today that there was not a permit taken for the power pit at Cherry Hill East. I don't know what the status of it is, so I need to do more research. And again, I'm running out of time, so I can't go into talking about the other permit stuff that I found about the Kilmer work And I'll end with this, and I guess this was just kind of a bad picture, but one of the flags at Kilmer was like this big. I mean, I'm sure that was a temporary flag or something. I would assume the classroom would have a normal flag, but thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Mindy Rosen, 6 Fairhaven Court. First, I'd like to welcome our 2 new board members and to say that I've known Pat and your dad for like 30 years, so I probably watched you grow. So the accessible door was locked today when I walked in. Just wanted to mention that. So this is a question. Is it true that children with IEPs cannot have in-class support in honors or AP? Or does the district make accommodations like in-class supports for students with IEPs so that they could participate in honors and AP classes? Just a question. Then as I was driving here, I passed by East and I saw scaffolding. I didn't have time to stop. In the front part, I guess where the vestibule will be built. So my question is, since you are doing the wall, you've blocked the accessible walkway from the large lot to the smaller lot, and now with that scaffolding there, I'm wondering if there's going to be an accessibility issue into East. So that's another question. And really, that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Jessica Rodriguez, 522 Bancroft Road. Just want to touch back on the lunch issue, and I guess I have some questions regarding whether or not there is demographic information on the children who had outstanding balances, and if there is, there's any information regarding the languages that are being spoken at home. I know there was a comment made that the form goes out in English and in Spanish, but I would assume that there are other languages that it might be needed in. So I'm wondering if there's availability to the lunch form in a bunch of other languages that could be accessible to the kids, and whether or not we're actually doing the research on the demographics on the kids that have the outstanding balances, maybe not just for this specific year, but kind of look back at the previous years. I know that you can't find the forms to give them out to kids specifically, but if we're looking back at like last year or the year before, and there's a consistency in specific families, that we can be reaching out to them, and again, making sure that we're addressing any kind of language barriers. One of my big concerns is with back to school nights and families kind of being bombarded with a whole bunch of paperwork, and a lot of times that paperwork at the back to school night is not accessible at that particular day in those languages. So those would be my concerns, and maybe hoping to use those things to fill the gap in why we're not getting to the families that need the reduced lunch, and maybe, cutting down on the amount of money that's owed. And just one other note, I've been one of those parents that just because I forget to fill my school bucks bank, and I get the little alert in my email. So, drop the money in or whatever, but I've never gotten a letter from the school, ever. My daughter's going into 5th grade, so 5 years of never getting a letter from the school, nor have I ever gotten a phone call. So if that's supposed to be the policy and procedure, that you get a letter and a phone call because you have an outstanding balance, I've gotten neither. The only time I've ever been notified is through the My School Bucks account, because it sends me an alert. So for families who are not using that service, I don't know how they're being notified, if they're being notified properly, because if it's not going out to me, it may not be going out to other families as well. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Yoniaris 422 Cherry Hill Boulevard. I want to acknowledge Dr. Smith. I think it's your partial anniversary of when we put your documentation to the county. So I think you got like 3 of these different anniversaries coming up. So once again, thank you so much. You've been awesome this year. I don't think it was planned for your enjoyable experience filling in for Dr. Malash, but you really have just been an incredible asset, and you've been really accessible to my family for issues. And so thank you for that. Keeping in that regard, I just want to acknowledge Mr. Carpolino, who has decided not to run this go-around. You've also been a voice for many, many years when I wasn't living here yet, when I was back living here. Just thank you for your advocacy, especially recently when you were down in Trenton for testifying. Never an easy act to do that as someone who did that in my college years. So thank you for that and everything you've done. And we'll do that more again in December, but just wanted to acknowledge your effort on that. Back to the agenda type items. Want to know what we're planning. I emailed Dr. Malash about this, just something I think school board members might not be aware of. It looks like SNAP policy is changing currently. The process is that if you are on SNAP, you're automatically auto-enrolled into free and reduced lunch, I believe. It has been suggested from the President's Office of the United States that's no longer going to be the policy. Just to plan for that and be mindful of that, of the upcoming challenge as we handle the school lunch challenges for the community. Would love to see the school district better partner with the recent community events, National Night Out. I feel like that'd be a great opportunity for the security team to be out and introducing those officers to the community. It's all about those relationships with the police, especially for our school-age children, to get to meet them in that type of setting, and also to be partnered with the library for the backyard bash. Concerned about the mercury in tuna. I know when about 4 or 5 years ago that was a lot in the press. If that's going to be our option, just being aware that there has been talk about the level of mercury and how much we're giving to our students in that regard. Also, are we sending out the communication about the balances via email? Wanting to reduce the cost, snail mail is very expensive and getting more expensive. And seeing if we can move to more paperless and just figuring out, send it home 100 different ways and hope for the best. I'm also curious about our level of kids taking AP classes and the number of credits they're achieving. I'm going for a master's degree in student service administration, and one of the things we talk about in our classes is that when we have freshmen skip over those key foundational classes, it ends up hurting them in sophomore and junior year when they don't have the classes where they have the opportunity to mess up and learn those mistakes. If they're starting in the second semester freshman, which is wonderful in terms of reducing your debt load, but giving them the opportunity to learn about what it means to be a college student, be on their own, and not having their parents there to protect them. So just trying to figure out that balance and working with our colleges, Rutgers, and the other ones are Rowan, to figure out what we can do to best prepare our students so we don't see a drop-off of, great, we've got all these students going in year 1, but all of a sudden year 2 comes and we're losing students. And looking at that number. I'm also curious about the chronic absenteeism at Thomas Paine and Kelmer being Title I schools. Is there something else going on with the parents in that regard that we could do to work on that as well? And then just to go back to the kindergarten bus policy, if we can just reiterate what the policy is going to be going forward, just for until you guys have a chance to review it. Thanks.
Thank you.
If I talk, no, I'm not going to talk too loud. My name is Jeff Potowitz. I live in 110 Kilwood Drive, Cherry Hill, New Jersey. A couple of weeks ago, you emailed around chips to receive nearly $2.5 million in extraordinary aid for 2018, 2019. In it, it says, generally speaking, districts receive 40 to 60% of their reimbursable annual cost annually. The SFA RA promised that the number would be 75% to 90. So 40 to 60 is very bad. It's not good at all. All right. There's a comment that was printed from a state senator, but I believe that there is a way to help schools while bringing sorely needed relief to straining tax base. It starts with one of the biggest expenses school districts face: extraordinary special education. Ultimately, if we fix our broken school funding system, the state needs to pay its fair share of the cost for students with special needs and the programs that support them. The state in Cherry Hill, the state doesn't, and the state in Cherry Hill definitely doesn't support special education in Cherry Hill, nor does it support extraordinary aid. There's a bill, State of New Jersey legislator, Bill Senate 3684. Synopsis: requires county to provide extraordinary special education aid to school districts located in county for students with costs over $55,000, and state to reimburse county. Remember, they've broken that promise for years, all right? And who's to say they will reimburse the county? But anyway, who's to say the county will reimburse the taxpayers? Because what's supposed to happen? The bill establishes a county tax levy cap exclusion in order to accommodate the payment by the county of extraordinary special education aid in the school districts. The bill also requires that all property tax bills, including a separate line that indicates the amount of tax levy being raised to support extraordinary special education aid. In other words, the state will set it up so the county will tax us more. The money's not going to come from the tax relief fund. It's going to be an additional property tax to the people of Cherry Hill and other districts. The people who will decide what the tax will be be our county legislators. All right, they will decide how much we will pay. It will go into property taxes. Our property taxes will go up. Meanwhile, they're going to change the wording of SFRA. It's not fair to our district, and I don't think our county should have a say.
Thank you. Any other comments? If not, we're going to close our comment section here, and I'm going to pass it to Dr. Malash to address some of the items he can for tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. So just a couple of things. First, it wasn't 4 different types of tuna fish. It was all the same meal. It was just as an example. People had talked so much about it. Aramark brought those just so folks could see what the lunch looked like. That was there. In terms of IEPs, so IEPs are individualized based on the children, right? So special education is provided so children can access the general education curriculum. For specifics about individual kids, it's questions we would ask case managers. The IEP team would have a discussion about what types of supports are needed for children to be successful. And in a minute, I'm going to ask Mrs. Sugars to talk about the scaffolding that's been being constructed over at High School East. In terms of the lunch issue and kids that owe money, right now we have it by child and then broken down by child and by school. Right now we do not categorize it by any other identifying factor. It's not broken out in terms of ethnicity. It is broken out by grade level. I can tell you it's equal opportunity when you look at the list, knowing a lot of the kids that are there. Free and reduced lunch forms are accessible in a variety of languages. We just don't send them out in all of those languages. It is one of the reasons when we changed the policy, some that came from new state guidelines and new federal guidelines, that it's a combination between the business office and the building principal and the counselors, because the principal and the counselors certainly know the kids and the families way better than the folks in the business office or any of us over here do. It was also one of the reasons as we try to support kids and families that we continued and we added full-time counselors in all 12 of the elementary schools. For that to be in there. It is something we will continue to take a look at because, again, they know those kids and who's there about this, what languages are needed. Dr. Podowitz, I agree with you. About 60% of the extraordinary aid is weak in terms of what the state is supposed to provide for us, and looking at in terms of what goes through. I will continue to give credit to Mrs. Sugars and Mrs. Ridgway, to Mrs. Wethington, and the folks in the People Services Office because we have continued to increase what the reimbursables are. I don't remember whether it was the extraordinary aid or one of the other ones, where the state sends out what they estimate that we'll be able, and we were at 120% of what they estimated that we would be able to get back because of the work that's done and the documentation that goes on within the district. SNAP, Mr. Yash, you did email me about SNAP. Nothing has changed at this point. If something does change, I expect that we will get guidance in terms of what that is. Again, our responsibility in all of these discussions is to get to know the kids and the families and to provide the support, in terms of what's there. I think that is all of them. And then I'm going to ask Mr. Sugars just to talk a little bit about the scaffolding and the accessibility over at High School East with the scaffolding that's been constructed.
I'm going to ask Mr. Bart to jump in if he needs to. Dr. Bart and Mr. Bart. So that main office, that main entrance will be maintained throughout the project. The scaffolding that's being built right now in that area, which I understand started today, I'm going to equate it to being in the city and them constructing scaffolding over a sidewalk so that you can still use the sidewalk. So that's what was happening today. That entrance will be maintained through the structural work. It'll also be maintained through the vestibule work. We'll shift things around as we need to, but that entrance will be maintained through both of those projects. Go ahead. Right, so for safety reasons, that entrance is closed temporarily just for until that scaffolding is completed.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. And so now I'm going to see if I have a motion to adjourn. Mrs. Matlack, Mrs. Scarpolino, thank you, everyone, for coming out. Appreciate all your comments and everything.